97% of the web still presents accessibility barriers to disabled people. That's not a typo. That's our digital infrastructure. Pages average over 50 preventable errors each, missing alt text, broken keyboard paths, unreachable forms. If you're a Gen X leader running a team, a product line, or a whole division, this isn't an edge case. This is your user base, your legal risk, and your culture baked into every screen you ship. I'm Dr. Tuboise Floyd. Today, we're asking, how do you make digital accessibility actually work when AI is touching everything from UX research to captions to code? And I'm not asking in theory, I'm asking someone who lives it. My guest today, Dr. Michele A. Williams, accessibility consultant, UX researcher, and author of Accessible UX Research, published by Smashing Magazine. Michele helps product research and policy teams rethink how they design, test, and ship so that disabled people aren't an afterthought, but a design constraint from day one. She's the person organizations call when they realize we never actually did accessibility in the first place. Michele, welcome to Human Signal.
Thank you so much, Tuboise, and thank you for having me. I'm glad we're talking about accessibility and where it actually lives in real teams and real organizations, and of course with AI changing the landscape every day.
Let's start with leaders who are quietly anxious right now. The Gen X product VP, the engineering director, the civic text lead. They see AI everywhere. They see lawsuits in the headlines and know accessibility is important, but it just feels like a compliance fire. Michele, from your vantage point, what's really at stake for them?
So I'd say let's look at it in maybe 3 buckets or so. So the first is equity. So who is getting to use your systems and who are you either quietly or really loudly shutting out? The second is resilience, whether your products handle real world diversity or they fall apart when you have what you believe to be these edge cases. And then the third would be trust. So when people repeatedly experience access barriers, they leave, right? They lose confidence in your brand, in your institution, and in your leadership. Not having accessibility in these areas is already doing that currently. AI is then magnifying that because now you are moving more rapidly, but also you're not necessarily catching those problems, or you're magnifying them or you're increasing them and therefore encoding them and accelerating them at scale. So this is what we need to be paying attention to.
Wow. So the risk isn't just we missed an alt tag, but rather we automated discrimination into our everyday operations.
Yeah, exactly. And because AI is so fast and almost invisible in some ways, it just amplifies what's already been happening, that accessibility has primarily been missed.
But in your book, you start with disability mindset. Before we get tactical, we have to talk about how are people thinking or not thinking about disability. What's the mindset problem inside teams?
So when I see inside teams that I work with is really reflective of the larger society that we're usually operating in. And when I say society, I'm not even just talking about the United States. We see this worldwide in that disability is often othered and made invisible. It's the largest minority group, and yet it's still seen as a minority group that doesn't need to be accounted for. And that's because we often, particularly non-disabled folks, feel that disabled people are not full contributors to the world. This is a concept known as ableism, and it is a discrimination against disabled folks because it is an assumption, for instance, that non-disabled ways of moving, thinking, communicating are the default, and everything else is a deviation and even to some extent lesser. So this relates to what are known as models of disability, the ways that we think about disability and the actions that result from that thinking. There are several models, but a particular note in the area that we're talking about are medical versus social. So that medical model primarily says disability is something to rehabilitate or institutionalize. The social model flips that and says it's not a disability that's disabling, it's the lack of access and the negative thinking by non-disabled folks. So in the working world, if people in positions of power have that medical model mindset, which is often the case, then disabled people aren't seen as equals, and their needs and considerations and overall inclusion in the process of building aren't either. So until there's a mindset shift, the actions won't truly change.
Wow. In your book, you share a story about UX researchers who ask, if we have accessibility specialists, why do we need disabled people in our research? What's broken in that question?
So to recap, that was some user experience professionals on a call with folks they didn't even know had disabilities, and they said that. And so one of the responses I had to that is, we have design guidelines, but we don't say, why do we need to talk to users? And in that, we usually mean non-disabled users. So we know that guidelines are not enough, but somehow when we put disability in the mix, people are strangely comfortable substituting checklists for lived experiences if they get to it at all. So the deeper issue is that we don't yet see disabled users commonplace as just users, as part of the user base. They're treated as some, even when I say they, there's an us versus they mentality, and disability is treated as something maybe even optional or something that's not yet considered.
I'm going to pivot here slightly because you bring it up. There's a language that you talk about in your book about the dichotomy, how disabled people reference themselves, or of this non-disabled people reference disabled people.
Perfect. So there's currently at present three primary ways that we talk about disability. So you're probably more so familiar with saying people with these disabilities, just known as person first. And that's how folks are taught to talk about disability. And that came from a good place. It came from the cognitive impairment community, who, particularly folks with intellectual disabilities, who said, hey, why don't you see a person before you see the disability? And to some extent, that is accurate. That's very true. But I think what it ended up doing is, unfortunately, it didn't actually change hearts and minds. Instead, it made disability seem like a bad word, like a taboo word. So then there are activists and there are many disability groups, and again, many cultures, who have decided that disability is just a descriptor. So why not put it first? So that's known as identity first. And that's how I tend to align as well. That disability is not a bad word. It's just part of the diversity of the human experience. So why not say it? And particularly if we're talking about something like accessibility and the discrimination and the lack of inclusion of people who have disabilities, then we need to keep talking about this segment of folks who are disabled people. The third way is usually to avoid disability at language at all, say handy capable or something. I've never seen too many actually disabled folks prefer that language. However, I don't think I don't think it's as empowering as just being able to say the word. I don't think that folks should be uncomfortable describing something as a condition or something as a disability, but for the most part, it really shouldn't need to come up. The idea is that if we normalize it enough and make sure we understand it's just part of our diverse set of the beauty of humans, then really it doesn't need to be a big thing. And also, we don't want language to stop us from doing the actual work.
Just hearing you say handy capable, I cringed.
Yeah.
I'm from Alabama. So if you don't know, and listeners, if you don't know, if you ever hear God bless your heart, that's an insult. That's not a compliment. So when I hear handy capable, oh, I cringe.
Yeah.
I cringe. That's just my mindset on how I look at that.
Now, what people are trying to say is take the dis out of disability, focus on the ability. So again, it's some of those terms tend to go back to the people first. So I won't say that all of them give you as much of a cringe. Again, I think a lot of that, though, again, goes back to that word ableism that I talked about. Disability as a whole is seen as a negative. Someone has to do something to get their power back. So words and language are very important to try to establish that I don't want to align with this idea that this is a negative. I want to align with the idea that this is okay. So that's where people are grasping at, trying to find the right phrasing that allows that to come through. And again, sometimes it hits the mark and sometimes it doesn't. But that's why I say ultimately it's about respecting individuals, but really it's about changing, again, that disability mindset. If we had a different disability mindset, folks wouldn't have to work as hard to come up with the right language, because we would not need to overcome what's really behind that, which is a discrimination.
Yeah, and I really like that approach where you talked about the person first language, the language that emphasizes the individual before the disability. I like application. So when I'm referring to a person, for example, I could say a person with a vision impairment. Is that correct? Okay.
So that is one accepted way.
Okay.
But most people I know with vision impairments say, just call me blind. Or just, I have low vision. This doesn't need to be a thing. I would say either way, person first or identity first, whichever one feels most comfortable for you. Start with that and then maybe confirm it in the spaces. So if you are talking to someone that you know has a disability, you can have a conversation with them about that. If you're writing an article, you can run it by some people that may have some more understanding in that area. Whatever it is, start to find your comfort zone, but also being respectful of the community that you are most engaged with at the time.
So if I ever get boxed up and I'm writing something, I'm calling you directly, Dr. Williams, to help me clarify that.
Yes, but also remember that the number one preferred way a person wants to be identified is by their name.
Correct.
So that's why I say at some point, don't get too hung up on the language, because remember that we're all just part of our human race. So that's why that language is important. But I think people get a little too hung up on it and don't do the other work that's really more important.
I try to learn people's names, and I have a non-standard name. So when people mispronounce my name, I just laugh about it. We have a good laugh and then go forward. And it's putting that human into that interaction, putting the person first. And I really like that approach. And I try my darndest to really sit down and have a clarifying question moment. Okay, so I know you have a disability, so how would you like me to refer? Michael, Jan, Tom, or whatever. So I try to acknowledge that first and have that discourse. But I'm going to challenge the Human Signal listeners to do as Dr. Michele Williams recommend, is put the person first. Ask the individual. If not, then reach out to some individuals who are experts in the field to help you out. Let's touch briefly on AI. And where does AI sit for you in this picture of disability?
AI has some obviously potential to do great things for accessibility, particularly at scale, but only if the current tactics are disrupted. For instance, we also see that AI has already done real harm, particularly if we're talking about the disabled community. So in hiring algorithms and benefits decisions, surveillance technologies, etc. Yes, AI is great at some of the tasks that the accessibility community has really been championing, like captions or describing images, which is known as alternative text. Ultimately, AI is a tool and not a savior.
You bring up excellent point, and I want to flesh out this particular point where you talk about the word disability. And for some, disability is a dirty word. And in your book, you talk about explicit language choices, disabled people, identity first. Talk to us about that. Why?
So as mentioned, there was literally a campaign by an organization called Easter Seals that had the tagline, disability isn't a dirty word. Many communities, deaf, autistic, blind, see disability as just a core of who they are. It's not something to be hidden behind. Now, I will categorize that disability and impairment are not always placed in the identity of some groups, particularly the deaf, capital D deaf community. Deafness is not seen as a disability or an impairment. It is simply an identifier. So we can continue to clarify that in some instances, some folks do not identify with the word disability or impairment, but more so with the descriptor of the condition itself or just the identity itself. That's actually going back to another model of disability called the cultural model. So the capital D deaf community is a culture, and therefore deafness is not necessarily in that vein associated with disability or impairment. But nonetheless, these are the descriptors. It's, again, what's most important is to ask individuals what they prefer and then honor that, but also don't fear perfect wording from building your relationships and doing the work.
We're talking about language in your book, and one that just really schooled me and jumped out to me is the concept of social model of disability. So in reading your book, I learned that, for example, capital D, deaf, as you say, is the identifier. And so with the social model, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's real fragile for me because it's brand new. So I'm trying to get comfortable in it, in the language, so forgive me. But in your social model, you talk about the primary goal in the social model of disability is the viewpoint that is caused by the environmental barriers and the social construction rather than the individual's impairment. And so my light bulb went off. I said, you know what? Sometimes when I go to family functions, it just be too loud and I just get a deaf ear. And I was like, I just tune out everything. So that was the way I related it in my mind to try to relate the concept. I'm on the right path with that thinking.
Because what that's saying is that for you, certain environments do and don't work. So this is why, say, for instance, if I'm consulting with someone on a physical event that they have going on, I would say you need a quiet area and then the main area, because some folks need a decompression, quiet space away from the crowd. And that is a known adjustment that folks need across a lot of different conditions. So that is taking the accountability upon the planners of the event to acknowledge the diversity of the people attending and create spaces that work for them. So that is changing the environment. That's not telling. Now, you could also say wear headphones, and we see that kind of thing as well. But I think a little too often we put it on the person to make all of the adjustments they need to make to participate, when there are just as easily opportunities for you to recognize what will allow a person to best show up in that environment and make those adjustments yourself. Yes, a portion of that is acknowledging that if we just made the environment more inclusive, maybe disability wouldn't feel as disabling to a person.
I need to talk to my buddy because his kid's bat mitzvah is coming up. And so I'm going to say, you know what? You need to contact Dr. Williams to make sure your party is accessible, right? Yeah. And has the proper structures and support centers for your guests. And hey, party planners and people who plan parties, you got to contact Dr. Williams in this field to make sure that you're planning your parties appropriately. Sweet 16s, bat mitzvahs, retirement parties, 50 plus parties, white parties, boots on the ground, etc.
Everything.
At the heart of this episode, as we pivot here, there's a simple shift that I'm seeing and the change that occurred in me. And it's designing with disabled people, and that's as much about power as it is about process. You agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would say yes and, right?
Okay.
You should be including disabled people in your processes. And this includes recognizing disabled folks as peers and leaders, not just recipients of what you make. For instance, I don't use the phrase with, not for, as in design with disabled people and not for them, only because I think that phrase is still somewhat positioning non-disabled people as the authority. So when someone says design with, not for, I don't think they're envisioning a disabled person as the designer or as the leader of that group. I think they're still thinking of a non-disabled designer, a non-disabled researcher, including disabled folks. But really, again, disability is part of the diversity of all human groups, no matter how we segment it. Disability should be showing up in the defining of the problem, the shaping of the research questions, the evaluation of the solutions, all throughout our processes, whatever it is that we build, but also with diverse groups of people working on them at all those points as well.
Wow. Say that phrase again, because I'm trying to process it in my mind.
That's something that you hear people say, design with, not for, but I don't use that. I think that it still positions non-disabled people as the authority in that phrasing. So there's another phrase we'll get to later that I like a little better.
Dr. Williams said, let's put a pin in that, Floyd.
Yeah, we'll hang out with it. You'll hear it later.
Let's zoom out to the system. Many teams hear accessibility, and immediately picture a blind person using a screen reader. That's part of the story. Really, it's only a small part. Can you sketch the broader landscape for everyone?
And I thank you for this question, because I think in general, people tend to place disability in one or two categories in every way. So like in physical spaces, we may only think of wheelchair users, and then in digital spaces, people who are blind, like what you mentioned. But really, there are several dozens of disabilities, all with wide-ranging impacts. So to help break that down, because of this diversity, there are often categories used to help us organize these considerations. So particularly in digital tech, we tend to have 5 major categories: vision, hearing, mobility, speech, and cognition. And within these are varying disabilities and degrees of disability. For example, within vision, there are actually more people that are known as what's called low vision. So people who are able to see to some extent, not completely blind. So low vision folks, particularly let's say those who are legally blind, may hold objects close to their face or enlarge them to see clearly. So they may use software called magnification, which helps enlarge the view on their monitor, for instance. If you've ever heard of a consideration called color contrast, which makes sure the color of the text and background are sufficiently different, this is addressing a need for low vision folks. For instance, I recently had an opportunity to do research that included a deaf participant, but his feedback was more about how my client was using phone number and presumably voice-based telephone calls as a primary means of communication. Obviously, that's going to create a barrier for someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, as well as people who don't speak when we talk about that speech category. So this is why it's important to not narrow accessibility to just a few considerations, but instead broaden our understanding and representation in how we approach our products, our policies, and everything else that we build. But lastly, I'll clarify that the categories are a way to be systematic in our approach to doing inclusive work, but they don't represent how humans actually show up in the world. Expand that, and it doesn't even touch on how we still have a lot to learn about what we broadly call the cognitive categories, which is basically any way that people think and process information. So all of these changes how someone experiences your UI and your AI-driven content.
You have to ask. You have to ask. You can't assume anymore, and you can't lead with those old mindsets, especially when you're designing products for use. All things must be considered, in my opinion. I know we can get into the whole minimum viable product argument, speed to market, first mover, and all this business stuff. But you talked earlier about putting the person first. And that's the same overlap where we have in common with human signal. I say put the human first in everything that we do and everything that we say. So this is very important knowledge here that I gain, and that I'm encouraging our listeners today to get your book, Accessible UX Research. Dive into this particular chapter, get the nomenclature, understand the wording, broadening your viewpoint, if I could say it that way, on how you are looking at the dynamic disabilities or the multiple disabilities or the multifacetedness of we as the human race. Is that a safe way to say it and to address it?
Yeah, I think the only thing, going back to that social model, sometimes we wouldn't have to ask if the environment was just accessible. Like you almost feel like you need to ask everyone, do you have a disability? Not if the environment is already accessible. So when we talk about products and policies and whatever it is, again, that your listeners have a hand in building, if you just built it in a way that included what we know are the established, say, considerations, guidelines, best practices for the diversity of the users that are likely going to experience what it is, then we don't have to stop and disrupt and ask and fix and do these sort of jarring cycles. We can just be doing the right things for the people that we're doing them for right from the start.
And we're going to get to an action plan here today for our listeners, because that's what we advertise in the poster. And I want to say, people fussing at me and DMing me, Dr. Floyd, you didn't give a solution. You said action plan, etc. So yes, Dr. Williams is going to talk about action plan here. So stay tuned. But also you bring out a point that I feel like we need to flesh out here when we talk about day-to-day when you talk about exclusion in UX research and code, what does that actually look like on a real team?
It looks like a couple of different common patterns. So the first is just representation in general, when teams will say, we don't have disabled users for our product or whatever it is. And we talked about this idea of disability being much broader than what we're thinking about. It's literally almost statistically impossible to have a group without disability. The CDC's numbers, which keep adjusting, tend to have about 1 in 4 US adults, for instance, have some sort of disability. And we know that's still underreported because people are still getting better diagnoses for those cognitive categories. So we see women getting diagnosed as autistic or having ADHD, for instance, because there was an over-indexing previous to that. When you say we don't have disabled users, that's not true. And really what it means is we're not thinking about disabled users, or we're leaving them out to prioritize, so we think something else. So that's one way, that representation. And then there's the tools. Oftentimes the things that we're using and the things that we're making all are in this sort of what I call inaccessible digital ecosystem. So really, even if we wanted to, sometimes disabled folks can't participate in either the workforce or, again, the products that we're producing or the building of that in the interim. Then when we talk about AI generated code and content, those things, again, seem to be fine, but they were built on, again, what you said at the very beginning, 97% of the web has some accessibility issues. So if AI was trained on what's present is inaccessible, so what's produced is inaccessible as well.
You talk about shipping product and want to flesh out an example. So generated code and content. We know that this stuff out the box is trained with standard models. And a lot of times these standard models are not disability first by design. So when they train in these models, some of these products are shipped, they look fine visually, but they don't have the correct semantic structure, right? No labels or no logical focus order. That's just chaos. Don't you agree? I think that's just chaos to assistive technology.
Oh, literally, that's what that defines inaccessibility. And so for your listeners, particularly to clarify, a lot of inaccessibility comes in the web and mobile app domains.
Okay.
It's because of how it gets coded. So there are ways to code that are what we call semantic, that are meaningful, that assistive technologies, which are the devices that people who have disabilities would use to navigate and accomplish computer-based tasks. So if I'm using an assistive device or an assistive setting, which, by the way, talking about language, all technology is assistive, but we'll leave that for now. But if I'm using a different setting than what is considered, we'll say the default, and let's say I need font bigger, or I need it recolored, or I need it to read aloud to me, things like that. In order for those things to work, the assistive technology needs to understand the code to know what to do. So it needs to know how to read this aloud, how to engage with the keyboard versus tapping. When we say something is not accessible, it's because the code is not giving the assistive technology the information it needs to know how to engage. The code is not meaningful. Because technology has moved so quickly, there have been spaces where, so basically accessibility benefits from standards, but standards come after innovation. So we find that there's always a lag in making sure that new innovations are accessible. Sometimes it takes time for those things to catch up. And by the time something has caught up, it's proliferated. We do find that there's already a lot of tech debt in terms of inaccessibility. And then when you build in things that allow everyone to make a website, everyone to make an app, and those things do not require you to include accessibility considerations, and then AI has been built on that foundation.
Listen, and I'm going to give you an example. And that's why I was laughing earlier about when you were talking about screen readers, the zoom in, the zoom out. I was in a panic one day. I was in a rush. I was in my car and I had to get to a meeting and I needed to connect it to Zoom. So I said, hey, Siri, open Zoom. Siri didn't open Zoom, the app. It opened Zoom, the device configuration, and it physically blew up everything super big. And I had no experience with that. And so I was like, oh my God, now I'm going to get fired. I'm going to have to lose my job. I missed this important meeting with the president and folks in it. And so my phone was locked. I had to come home, sit on the computer, Google, and figure out how to get out of that setting. So that was my experience with assistive technology on the iPhone. Siri misinterpreted what I was asking from a speech standpoint when I said zoom, that app, and it zoomed the screen in. That was my experience. So I can only imagine what our disabled friends go through every day.
One thing I'll pull from that too is to get familiar with what your devices have built in. So the other thing that when I say assistive technology, a lot of your devices have a lot of settings that would benefit people, even if they don't identify. Anyone over 40 can benefit from larger text, period.
Hello.
So there's been a lot of talk, for instance, about period.
Hello.
So there's been a lot of talk, for instance, but really they should just be part of your settings. And unfortunately, Apple named their magnification zoom. I've noticed that as well. But also, again, if we had normalized the idea that you knew your phone could magnify in that way because it was just a setting on the phone, you wouldn't have panicked. You would have known how to undo that and open what you wanted.
Exclusion becomes the default setting, not because anyone chose it, but because no one designed against it.
The hope is that we are more intentional not to do that, but absolutely, by and large, exclusion is the default setting, yes.
In your book, you write about disability dongles, solutions that look clever to non-disabled people, but don't actually help disabled people. Give us an example.
I'll first acknowledge disability advocate Liz Jackson for coining this term. And so a classic example of this is, say, a smart cane. So we know that blind pedestrians use a white cane, and then engineers will often add sensors or vibrations or connectivity to the canes. But when you talk to white cane users, you hear why these devices really aren't meeting the needs. They're heavy, they're expensive, and they're distracting. They don't reliably tell you where an obstacle is. That doesn't tell me where something is and what it is and what to do. So they're really not solving a real problem. And then if you dig deeper, what many blind pedestrians actually want is safer environments.
What about the meta glasses connected to a phone to help individuals navigate a lot better?
The meta glasses are used.
Oh, they are. So that's I'm not on top of it. I'm not on top of a day.
I love some meta glasses.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow.
You have to be careful with privacy and all of that too. Every tool has its caveats, but it is absolutely necessary to check. Yes.
So you give Meta a gold star on their
no. I didn't say that. I just said people use it.
And to exit out of this, because we got so much more to talk about, the real move in design isn't more tech for the disabled person. But that's not what your book is saying. I think your book is saying remove barriers from the system.
I think it could be a bit of both. So again, if we're aligned with the social model, then yes, before we ask what can we build, let's be clear about, do we need to build something, right? What is the actual problem and what would be a meaningful solution? But if the solution is technology, then we make sure that technology is not going to present yet another barrier in our efforts to, say, remove a barrier. So I think there's just considerations.
Let's come back to AI. Leaders are being sold that AI is the miracle cure for accessibility. We'll just auto caption everything. We'll auto generate alt text and we'll auto test our UI. But is that generally helpful? Where does it backfire?
So again, we said earlier that AI has some potential. For instance, auto captions is a big step from no captions. Or if you have a large bank of media, when we say alt text, again, that's a description of the images for folks who can't see it. So if there's a way to automate some of that task and get that going, great. And yes, automated tools are actually really important for flagging issues with your code at scale if it's taught to do that to begin with. But where it backfires is that this idea of the magic solution. Auto captions are often not good enough, so they need some correcting in order to be fully comprehensive. Alternative text is not always the right description that's produced. So a woman in a meeting room doesn't necessarily tell you why an image has been included, say, on a story about women in C-suite, something like that. And then again, automated tests, even when they are programmed correctly, only cover a portion of guidelines. like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So even if they're accurate, which is a big if, they still may miss the overall user experience that comes from manual testing. So Accessibility is a company that will often come up in this area, but also look at the $1 million fine they're facing for the false claims that they made, and that will start to get you some of the understanding of the hype versus the reality.
Penalties and fines.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again, and backlash and lawsuits. Be careful.
So the pattern is AI can draft, but the human needs to review or has to review. And the review has to include disability expertise and not just a quick glance. And you can't use the AI to act as the stand-in for the disability expertise.
Ooh, yes.
Did I touch you? Did I touch you with that statement?
We got to talk to real people. So I would say exactly that real human in the loop, not the imitated human, is going to be important. AI should be a tool embedded in a thoughtful, accessible process, but not a replacement for, again, disabled participants, for human judgment, etc. Absolutely.
Yeah, because we know with AI, it will hallucinate and it will lie to you with a straight face. It will tell you with great confidence that it is right, but it's wrong. And that's why you need the SMEs, subject matter experts, to walk through and to review.
There's some basic knowledge that all of us really should have been taught in all of our crafts. No matter what field you were in, you should have been taught some manner of disability inclusion in that. So it's not to say that you need an expert for everything. We don't. At some point, everything can't be up to experts. The point of an expert is the more complex part of whatever that is. So really, there should be some baseline understanding. And that's why I did things like wrote the book, or I do trainings, because my mission is to make accessibility accessible. It should not be a topic that people don't feel comfortable with or comfortable talking about or have a misunderstanding about. Instead, we all should have some basics. Then you bring in expertise when it goes beyond that.
I want to touch this, and then we're going to exit out. Then we're going to go to the action plan in our third segment. A lot of leaders are stuck at, Dr. Williams, we passed automated checks. What more do you want from us? So when organizations bring you in, what are they usually stuck on? And how do you help them move beyond the checklist?
First, I would say if someone even passed an automated check, you're doing great. Usually what happens is you're not even aware to do that check, or you're not passing it at all. But nonetheless, regardless of where you are, there's still going to be generally some sticking points that need to be unstuck in order to get this done. One would be in, say, like something around like compliance plateau or something like that, where maybe you've had even some training or run a scan, but nothing is really improving for real users. Oftentimes, accessibility is talked about in an abstract way, but it never actually makes it into the product. We want to make sure that we're finding ways to actually get it into the thing that's produced, not just talked about internally. So that leads to a tool mismatch. Again, we talked about the fact that sometimes the tools we're using don't allow for either disabled teammates to do the work and be engaged in the peer discussions that are happening, and also when we talk about research participants. We might need to look into some alternative ways to make sure that disabled folks can feel included in the various environments. And that might be, again, some different processes or ways of tooling. And then leadership is really important. Leadership has to advocate for this work to get done. So that may look like bringing them on to understanding what this is about, and then also translating that into policy, procurement, and roadmaps. So this is how we can shift from, did we check the box, to building it in as part of just your everyday processes.
What I'm seeing is, because I've done a lot of business process design work in Georgetown, helping and supporting executives and leading projects, etc. You are just not doing audits. You are redesigning how teams work.
Because an audit is just a snapshot. I'm more interested in helping teams build a practice that will sustain them after I'm gone. I don't want to be there forever. I don't want you to need me forever. I want you to feel confident that this is how you operate. This is how you do this work.
We're getting ready to unpack the practice. 90 days to make it real. I'm going to lead with talking about as you talk about too in your book and point out, a 90-day accessibility commitment. On Human Signal and on the poster when we're advertising the show, we promise listeners that they'll walk away ready to commit to 90-day accessibility practices your team can sustain. So let's make that concrete. If I'm a Gen X leader in a real organization, what does a 90-day arc actually look like?
Let's talk about that first 30 days. I would call that establishing your baseline. So within that, you're going to do a scan. Where are, let's say, even AI and accessibility already intersecting in your organization? Where are you doing things like those auto captions, auto summaries, auto generating the UI, the copy, the code? If you have a few of those places, then what external non-AI based tool or resource can you use to validate what is being output? For example, an internal team review, an automated scan tool that is based on human input for the applicable accessibility criteria. Whatever that is, based on that scan, you can start to see where you are currently in your ability to produce accessible outputs. Then, while you're evaluating your production tools and processes, also ask your research or product teams, are we including disabled folks in our studies, in our outreach to consumers? If the answer is no, or I don't know, or never, then that's something to flag as well. And if you know you're not thinking about accessibility at all, then the first step might be to understand and just document your current pipeline and your key people. Begin to recognize where you're putting your organization at risk and start to think about what you can disrupt in that current roadmap to prioritize accessibility. So the goal of the first month is to stop guessing and to learn how your system is actually behaving.
So month one is reality testing, not heroics.
Absolutely. We have to start with knowing where you are and then map out what's next.
Okay, excellent. So that's the first 30. Okay?
First 30.
All right. Now we're moving into the next set of 30.
Day 31 through 60, second 30 is now start to change those defaults. Now we start that disrupting of the pattern that we collected. Identify whether your current processes are going to result in accessible patterns. For instance, is your design system built accessible? Are your coding tools overriding accessibility? Are your teams equipped with the expertise to know this is occurring? Wherever there are gaps, understand what is going to help overcome that. Is it training? Is it different tools? Is it hiring practices? Then we want to add accessibility and AI impact questions to our procurement. Again, if we're thinking about teams are going to need to use something to get their jobs done, now we start to ask those vendors, does your platform meet accessibility standards? Do you have documentation to show that? And then also, do your AI tools allow human in the loop reviews of the output to ensure compliance? Because again, we may have identified some areas where that's not happening. So we're trying to figure out and pinpoint those areas where we can inject accessibility considerations into that. And then lastly, choose an upcoming research project and make inclusion of disabled participants non-negotiable. Build that time and that budget in. This is where we stop relying on individual champions or grassroots efforts, if there were any, and start putting this in your infrastructure.
And once it's in procurement and the templates, it's much harder to quietly roll back.
That's the hope, right? You're building in guardrails. You're not just giving pep talks or again, talking about it in the abstract.
So guardrails are in place, right? Not giving pep talks. Now we're in the last 30 days. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So again, I'm trying to be very realistic. Disruption is not easy. Disruption is disruptive. We don't, again, want everything to just be all solved by the 90 days, but we can start to make real steps to normalizing. For instance, we can actually run that inclusive research that you planned. Now, one of the things that may be difficult is finding participants, but even in that, start to understand why is it difficult to find participants who are disabled, who have that disability lens, and then start to leverage disability-focused networks to break that cycle. And of course, you're using accessible tooling to capture the feedback. Part of that is in my book as well. But then because you have that research done, bring those clips to those leadership reviews. Let the executives hear how folks are navigating your products with assistive technology, or talking about how that maybe AI generated content like those auto captions don't work. All of this is, again, starting to normalize the idea that this is not okay. We're going to do things differently. We're going to have disabled humans in the loop, all of that. And then document what you're going to change as a result. So you probably have now learned something, whether you've been assessing your product with those scans, you've been talking to users, you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. So now we write it all down and again, continue to map out a plan. So what are we going to fix? What maybe needs to be postponed? Maybe what are we going to say doesn't ship because we haven't made this change yet? By day 90, accessibility isn't this special project we're going to get to, or this special thing we hope to one day accomplish. It's just part of a feedback loop. It's part of we're building that muscle of thinking about it, asking about it, and all these checkpoints, and it's starting to feel normal.
And this is where human signal intersects with your work. Our mission is to help real operators slow unsafe rollouts, rewrite procurement criteria, and build governance around reality instead of vendor hype. Accessibility is one of the sharpest reality checks we have.
If your AI strategy is producing systems that disabled people can't use, that's a pretty strong sign your governance is performative and not protective.
Your final chapter zooms out to disability inside the UX research profession itself. What do you want leaders to hear on that front?
Two things. The first is that recognize disabled professionals, not just disabled participants. And don't just consult disabled folks occasionally. They should be hired, promoted, be real decision makers. Now, again, statistically, you likely already have disabled leaders, whether they identify or not, but also in normalizing this idea of what it looks like to have diversity in these spaces should be inclusive of disability as well. So if your tools and workflows are inaccessible, you're literally locking out disabled talent from the field and from leadership. I would really implore you to make sure that you are not creating those barriers and that folks who want to join you can. And then going out, zooming out a little bit more, these policies, AI-based and otherwise, safety frameworks, research standards, all of these need to be built with disabled folks, hopefully in the room, in the spaces, so that again, we're not rebuilding the same exclusion that we've been talking about at higher speed.
So if we're serious about AI governance, we must include disabled people, and we must have them be among the people we design with and answer to as a built-in accountability.
Yeah, I'd say so. Let me give you a phrase to put in your head. Here's the phrase, everybody. Nothing about us without all of us.
Gotcha.
So historically, the mantra that came out of the disability rights movement, which I'll encourage you all to really explore, there was a mantra, nothing about us without us. What was happening is people were making decisions about disabled folks without consulting disabled folks. So the mantra became nothing about us without us, but it has evolved to nothing about us without all of us. There should not be spaces where someone is left out intentionally. That again goes back to that mindset which informs our actions. Nothing about us without all of us.
Michele, thank you for your leadership in that, because you whooped my end with all love and with the utmost kindness, and I'm very appreciative of that. Moving on to the next one. Michele, for the leader who's listening to this and feels both convicted and overwhelmed, what's one action you want them to take this week?
I don't want people to walk away thinking that I am not living in reality. And the reality is that including accessibility considerations into your pipelines might be a significant shift, particularly if it's not something that's been explicit to this point. However, that each day brings more legal risk when you're not doing it. So delaying is not the answer either. Just saying, oh, we can't do this is not the answer. I would advise to start with those probes like we talked about earlier to establish your baseline. Just ask around, ask if people in your organization are even familiar with this concept. There may be people currently doing it. They're just not formally saying so. It's not part of their job description. Someone may even have an interest in starting. They just haven't been empowered to do that. I often find teams have access to a few in-house champions that they just aren't fully leveraging. And also sometimes just good build practices are unknowingly leading to accessible outcomes because things like good user experience, good code practices, inclusive policies are the foundations of accessibility. The main thing is to start asking, start probing, and just see where you are.
If you're thinking we need help, this is literally what Michele does. She works with organizations to redesign their research practices, product decisions, and workflows so that accessibility is built in, not bolted on. To go deeper, pick up her book, Accessible UX Research by Dr. Michele A. Williams, and visit her online to learn how to bring her into your team as a strategic partner. You'll find the links to the book, to Michele's work, to our conversation in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music, and wherever you listen. Audience, committing to the next 90 days of real, accountable, accessible practice is now your challenge. Thanks for listening. This is Dr. Floyd signing off.